What does it take to end a civilization? Not weaken it, not challenge it, end it. Cities burned, trade routes severed, palaces abandoned, entire political systems collapsing within a single generation. At the close of the late Bronze Age, some of the most advanced societies on Earth disintegrated almost simultaneously. And in the inscriptions of one surviving empire, a name appears, not a nation, not a kingdom, but a label, the Sea Peoples. Who were they? Invaders? Migrants? Mercenaries? Or simply a symptom of something much larger? In the centuries before this collapse, the Eastern Mediterranean was deeply interconnected. Egypt, the Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greece, the city-states of the Levant, and powers in Cyprus and Anatolia were tied together through diplomacy, royal marriages, and complex trade networks. Bronze itself required cooperation. Copper from Cyprus, tin from distant regions, transported across sea lanes that stitched these cultures together. It was an international system, sophisticated, stable, interdependent. Then, within a few decades around the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE, that system fractured. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, was destroyed and never reoccupied as an imperial center. Mycenaean palace complexes, such as Pylos and Mycenae, were burned. Major Levantine cities, including Ugarit, show evidence of violent destruction. Trade and luxury goods and raw materials declined sharply. Literacy systems tied to palace administrations disappeared in several regions. For centuries afterward, the Eastern Mediterranean entered what historians often call a dark age, not a time without people, but a time with far fewer written records and far simpler political structures. The most detailed contemporary references to the so-called Sea Peoples come from Egypt, particularly inscriptions during the reigns of Merneptah and Ramesses III. These texts describe groups with names such as Shurdan, Shekelesh, Peliset, Tjeker, and Denyen. They are portrayed as confederations arriving by both land and sea, sometimes with families and ox carts, suggesting not merely raiders, but migrating populations. Ramesses III's reliefs at Medinet Habu depict a major battle in which Egyptian forces confront fleets of these groups in the Nile Delta. The inscriptions claim victory. Egypt survived, weakened but intact. But the Egyptian sources are political documents. They frame events from the perspective of a state defending itself. They do not explain origins. Archaeology offers clues, but not a single clear answer. Some scholars associate certain Sea Peoples groups with displaced populations from the Aegean world. Others suggest connections to Western Anatolia or even Central Mediterranean regions. The Peliset, for instance, are widely linked to the Philistines, who later appear in the Levantine archaeological record. Yet even here, the story is complex. Material culture shows both continuity and change, migration mixed with local adaptation. What makes the Sea People so compelling is not simply their presence, but the timing. Their movements coincided with drought evidence in parts of the Eastern Mediterranean. Pollen studies and climate data indicate periods of reduced rainfall. Famine is mentioned in some contemporary texts. There is also evidence of internal rebellions within established empires. The Hittite state, for example, appears to have been strained before its final destruction. Trade routes were vulnerable. Systems built on long-distance exchange are efficient but fragile. This raises a deeper possibility. Perhaps the Sea Peoples were not a singular external force that destroyed civilization. Perhaps they were one element in a cascading failure. When harvests decline, when trade falters, when political authority weakens, populations move. Migration can look like invasion from the perspective of those receiving it. Armed conflict can erupt not because of expansionist ambition, but because multiple stressed systems collide. The late Bronze Age world was globalized by its own standards. Elites corresponded across languages. Goods traveled vast distances. Diplomatic letters from the period reveal kings addressing one another as brother. But interconnectedness carries risk. When one node fails, pressure radiates outward. If tin shipments are disrupted, bronze production slows. If bronze weapons and tools become scarce, military and agricultural stability declines. If authority weakens, local unrest grows. Under those conditions, mobile groups seeking land or security can become catalysts for larger collapse. Egypt's survival was not effortless. After repelling Sea People's incursions, it too entered a period of contraction. Central authority diminished in the following centuries. Across the region, urban populations shrank. Monumental construction slowed dramatically. Writing systems like Linear B disappeared in Greece. It would take centuries for new political forms, such as the classical Greek city-states and the Neo-Assyrian Empire, to emerge from the ruins. The Sea Peoples remain elusive because they were likely not a single ethnicity or unified nation. The term is modern, drawn from Egyptian phrasing. It may describe coalitions formed under pressure, alliances of displaced groups, mercenaries, maritime raiders, and migrants. Some may have integrated peacefully into new regions. Others may have fought violently for survival. Their identity was probably fluid, shifting with circumstance. What endures is the pattern. A complex international system collapses. States blame external enemies. Archaeology reveals both destruction and adaptation. And from that turbulence, new cultural landscapes form. The so-called destroyers were also participants in transformation. The Iron Age did not simply follow the Bronze Age chronologically. It emerged through disruption, technological change, population shifts, and new political experiments. The Sea Peoples force us to confront a difficult truth about civilizations. Collapse is rarely caused by a single blow. It is usually systemic. Environmental stress, economic fragility, political instability, and human migration intersect. The inscriptions of Ramesses III freeze one dramatic moment, ships clashing in the delta. But behind that image lies a deeper story of interconnected societies stretched beyond resilience. In the end, the Sea Peoples are less a mystery of identity than a mirror of vulnerability. They remind us that complexity brings strength and exposure. When networks bind the world together, they also bind its failures. Civilizations do not disappear overnight, they unravel. And sometimes, those remembered as destroyers are simply the visible edge of a much larger transformation.